My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 29, and I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until my wedding day. I'd been planning this moment for 18 months with my fiancé David, pouring my heart and savings into creating the perfect celebration. What I didn't expect was my maid of honor, Jessica, standing up during our reception dinner to announce her own engagement to Marcus, a man I'd caught her cheating with just 3 weeks earlier. The room erupted in congratulations while I sat frozen at the head table, watching my best friend of 12 years steal my thunder with a smile that never reached her eyes. David squeezed my hand, confused by my pale expression, having no idea that the woman he'd known since college had been systematically destroying our friendship from the inside. Jessica raised her champagne glass toward me, her voice honey-sweet with false affection. Sarah's always been such an inspiration to me. Watching her find love made me realize I deserve the same happiness. The irony was suffocating. 3 weeks earlier, I'd gone to Jessica's apartment to surprise her with bridesmaid gifts, personalized jewelry I had custom made for each girl. I used my spare key, calling out as I entered, only to freeze at the sound of familiar laughter from her bedroom. Through the crack in her door, I saw Marcus, my college friend who'd introduced David and me 4 years ago. They were tangled in her sheets, his wedding ring glinting on the nightstand next to her phone. I'd backed out silently, my heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus had been married to his wife Claire for 6 years, and they'd just had their second baby 8 months ago. Jessica knew this. She'd been to their house for dinner parties, had held their newborn son, had listened to me worry about Claire's postpartum depression. Yet here she was, destroying a family while pretending to be my loyal friend. The worst part wasn't just the affair itself, it was realizing this explained everything. Jessica's sudden interest in wedding planning, her insistence on meeting with vendors alone, her strange questions about our guest list. She'd been using my wedding as her personal networking event, making connections and laying groundwork for her own future while sabotaging small details of mine. The flowers weren't quite right. The cake was a different flavor than requested. The photographer missed key moments during our ceremony. Now, watching her bask in congratulations that should have been focused on David and me, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Jessica had no idea who she was really dealing with. While she saw me as her sweet, naive friend who worked as a nonprofit coordinator, she'd never bothered to ask about my family background or why I could afford such an elaborate wedding on my modest salary. My phone buzzed with a text from my older brother, Kevin. "Dad's asking why you look like you want to murder someone in all the photos Mom's sending." Kevin was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, specializing in family law and divorce cases. Our father owned a chain of successful restaurants across 3 states, and our mother came from old money, investments and properties she'd inherited but never flaunted. I excused myself from the head table, telling David I needed to touch up my makeup. In the bridal suite, I stared at my reflection, my grandmother's diamond necklace catching the light. 3 generations of strong women had worn this necklace on their wedding days, women who didn't let anyone diminish their joy. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Claire's number. The conversation was brief but devastating. Claire had suspected something was wrong for months. Marcus coming home late, being secretive with his phone, emotional distance since the baby was born. When I gently told her what I witnessed, she broke down crying, but thanked me for my honesty. "I needed to know," she whispered. "I deserve to know the truth about my own life." 3 hours later, as Jessica and Marcus slow danced to "At Last" while our wedding guests cooed over their romantic story, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It was Claire, using a friend's phone. Confronted him. He confessed everything, divorce papers being filed Monday. "Thank you for giving me my life back." I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Marcus with a simple note. Thought you should see this before you get too comfortable. Then I turned off my phone and returned to my husband, ready to enjoy the rest of our evening. Jessica and Marcus were still dancing, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in their perfect little bubble. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Marcus had apparently received my message during their engagement celebration at Jessica's parents' house, where they'd gone after our reception. According to the frantic texts from mutual friends, he'd gone white as a sheet, mumbled something about needing air, and left without explanation. Jessica spent the rest of the night calling him while her parents and relatives demanded answers about their sudden engagement announcement. Jessica's messages to me were a masterclass in manipulation. "Sarah, something terrible has happened. Marcus is having some kind of breakdown. I think the stress of everything is getting to him. Can you help me figure out what's wrong?" She still didn't know I was the one who'd lit the fuse. Part of me almost admired her commitment to the performance, even as her world crumbled around her. But I wasn't done. Jessica had spent months sabotaging my wedding planning, turning what should have been joyful preparation into a series of small disasters and disappointments. She'd questioned every decision, suggested cheaper alternatives, and somehow always been too busy to help with the tasks she'd volunteered for. Now I understood why. She'd been planning her own engagement announcement all along. David and I were supposed to leave for our honeymoon in Bali that afternoon, but I made a quick stop first. I drove to the office of Harrison, Chen and Associates, my brother Kevin's firm, where I'd been doing freelance grant writing for their pro bono cases. Kevin was waiting in his office with a cup of coffee and a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" he asked, noting my swollen eyes from crying. Not tears of sadness, but rage. I told him everything. The affair, the announcement, the months of subtle sabotage. Kevin listened with the careful attention that made him such an effective lawyer. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "So what do you want to do about it?" It wasn't a question about revenge. Kevin knew me better than that. It was a question about justice. "Claire's going to need representation," I said. "Someone who understands how to protect her interests and her children's futures. Someone who won't let Marcus hide assets or manipulate the narrative." Kevin nodded slowly. His firm handled high-net-worth divorces, and they had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and absolutely devastating when the opposing party had been unfaithful. "I'll have my assistant call her this afternoon," Kevin said. "Pro bono, considering the circumstances and your referral." He paused, studying my expression. "But that's not all you want, is it?" I shook my head. Jessica had made this personal by using my wedding as her stage. She'd stolen my moment, my joy, my celebration with my family and friends. That required a more direct response. That evening, while David and I were somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Jessica finally learned the truth. Claire had called her, voice steady with lawyer-backed confidence, to inform her that not only was she filing for divorce, but she was also considering a lawsuit for alienation of affection. "My attorney says I have an excellent case," Claire apparently told her, "especially since we have a witness to your affair." According to my mother, who heard it from Jessica's mother at their book club, Jessica immediately called everyone she could think of, trying to figure out who might have seen them together. She never suspected me, sweet, naive Sarah, who worked with disadvantaged kids and believed in true love. Even when she called my mother fishing for information, she positioned herself as the victim. "I'm so worried about Sarah," she'd said. "I hope her marriage is stronger than mine turned out to be." But Jessica's problems were just beginning. Marcus, facing the prospect of losing half his assets and paying substantial child support for 2 children, had lawyered up with his own representation. His strategy became clear quickly. Throw Jessica under the bus completely. He painted their affair as a brief lapse in judgment, claimed she'd pursued him relentlessly, and provided evidence of their communications that made her look like a calculated homewrecker. When I returned from my honeymoon 2 weeks later, tan and relaxed, Jessica was waiting in my apartment building's lobby. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes she'd had on at my wedding. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," she said, grabbing my arm as David and I walked toward the elevator. "Everything is falling apart. Marcus won't return my calls. Claire is trying to destroy me legally. And people are saying terrible things about me online." I looked at her with genuine curiosity. "What do you expect me to do about it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She probably expected immediate sympathy, offers to help, maybe even suggestions for how to salvage her reputation. Instead, I was looking at her like she was a stranger, which I'd realized she essentially was. "You're my best friend," Jessica said desperately. "You know I'm not a bad person. This whole thing just got out of hand. Marcus led me on, made me think he was going to leave Claire anyway. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Even now, caught and cornered, she was still lying. I'd heard her laughing about Claire's postpartum struggles, seen her encourage Marcus to stay out later, watched her plan their future while another woman's marriage crumbled." "Jessica," I said quietly, "you announced your engagement at my wedding reception. You've been sabotaging my wedding planning for months, making vendor meetings difficult and undermining my decisions. You've been having an affair with a married father of 2, including a newborn baby. And now you want me to feel sorry for you because there are consequences?" Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation began to sink in. David, who'd been quietly listening, stepped forward. "I think Sarah's been clear enough. We need to get upstairs and unpack." He took my hand and guided me toward the elevator, leaving Jessica standing alone in the lobby with tears streaming down her face. As the elevator doors closed, I saw her pull out her phone, probably calling the next person on her list of potential allies. Over the next month, Jessica's life unraveled completely. Claire's divorce attorney, my brother Kevin, had done exactly what he'd promised. Marcus was facing a substantial settlement, supervised visitation with his children, and the loss of most of his assets. Desperate to minimize his losses, he provided Kevin's office with a detailed timeline of his affair with Jessica, including evidence of her encouragement and participation in deceiving Claire. But the real devastation came from an unexpected source: Jessica's workplace. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized company, and one of her colleagues was married to Marcus's business partner. When word of the affair and its messy aftermath spread through their professional networks, Jessica found herself increasingly isolated at work. Her boss, a woman with strong feelings about infidelity after her own divorce, began scrutinizing Jessica's performance more carefully. It turned out that Jessica had been cutting corners in other areas of her life too. Her expense reports were inconsistent, she'd been taking extended lunch breaks to meet with Marcus, and she'd used company resources to plan personal events, including researching venues and vendors for the engagement party she'd never gotten to throw. When her boss conducted a thorough review, Jessica was terminated for misuse of company property and time theft. The final blow came from the most unexpected source: our mutual friend group. Jessica had assumed they would rally around her, especially once Marcus painted her as a victim of his manipulation. Instead, they were horrified by her behavior at my wedding. Several of them reached out to me directly, apologizing for not intervening when Jessica made her announcement and expressing disgust at her complete lack of consideration for David and me. We always knew she was competitive, our friend Amy told me over coffee, but we never thought she'd be so calculating, using your wedding as her platform, then expecting us to celebrate her relationship with a married man? It's sociopathic. The friend group that had sustained Jessica through college and her 20s had effectively voted her out, leaving her socially isolated just as her romantic and professional lives imploded. 6 months later, I ran into Jessica at a coffee shop near my office. She was working as a temp at a small firm, living in a studio apartment after being unable to afford her old place without Marcus's financial contributions. She looked healthier than she had that day in my lobby, but there was something broken in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," she said quietly, approaching my table, "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I've been thinking about what happened, and I owe you a real apology." I gestured to the empty chair across from me, curious to hear what she had to say after months of silence between us. "I was jealous," Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You seemed to have everything figured out, a career you loved, a man who adored you, a family who supported you. I felt like I was falling behind, like I was running out of time to build something meaningful. When I met Marcus, he represented everything I thought I wanted: success, stability, someone who chose me over everything else in his life." I listened without interrupting, recognizing that this conversation was more for her benefit than mine. Jessica needed to confess, to try to make sense of her own choices, but nothing she said could undo the damage she'd done to multiple lives. I convinced myself that announcing our engagement at your wedding was romantic, that it would be this beautiful moment we'd all remember forever. I didn't think about how it would overshadow your day, or how selfish it was to steal your spotlight. "And the affair?" I asked gently. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "There's no excuse for that. Claire didn't deserve what we did to her, and neither did their children. I kept telling myself that Marcus would have left anyway, that their marriage was already over. But that was just me lying to myself to avoid feeling guilty. I destroyed a family because I was too impatient to build something real of my own." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of her confession settling between us. Finally, Jessica looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "Do you think there's any chance we could ever be friends again? I know I don't deserve it, but I miss having you in my life. You were the best friend I ever had, and I threw it away for something that was never real to begin with." I considered her question carefully. The Jessica sitting across from me seemed genuinely remorseful, broken down by consequences and forced to confront her own behavior. But the damage she'd done extended far beyond our friendship. Claire was still rebuilding her life as a single mother. Marcus had lost his children's respect along with his marriage, and I'd learned that my trust had been misplaced for months leading up to my wedding. "I forgive you," I said finally, and meant it. "But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. You made choices that hurt a lot of people, including me, and those choices have consequences that can't be undone. I hope you find happiness and build something real for yourself, but it's not going to include me." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face, but there was something like relief in her expression too. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. David and I were stronger than ever, having weathered our first major crisis as a married couple. I'd grown closer to my family, particularly Kevin, and had gained a new appreciation for the network of support I'd taken for granted. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people and to value myself enough not to accept betrayal quietly. The nonprofit where I worked had offered me a promotion to program director, partially based on the grant writing skills I developed working with Kevin's firm. My salary had nearly doubled, and I was finally in a position to be financially independent of my family's resources, though knowing they were there if I needed them provided a security that Jessica had never understood. 3 months later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Claire was remarrying, a widower she'd met in her divorce support group, a man with 2 children of his own, who understood the complexities of blended families. The invitation was simple but elegant, and the ceremony was planned for a small garden behind a restaurant owned by her fiancé's brother. I RSVP'd immediately, genuinely happy for her second chance at love. At Claire's wedding, I watched her dance with her new husband while their 4 children played together nearby, and I thought about the different paths our lives had taken from that night when I'd made the hardest phone call of my life. Jessica had lost everything she thought she wanted in pursuit of something that was never really hers to begin with. Claire had found something better than what she'd lost, built on honesty and mutual respect instead of secrets and lies. As for Marcus, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state, starting over with a new job and a small apartment near his ex-wife's family, so he could maintain regular contact with his children. The custody arrangement allowed him weekend visits, and he was reportedly attending therapy to address the issues that had led to his affair. Whether he'd learned anything from losing his family remained to be seen. The last I heard about Jessica, she'd moved back in with her parents and was working on getting certified as a teacher. A complete career change that suggested she was trying to rebuild herself from the ground up. Part of me hoped she'd found some peace and purpose in helping others, though I suspected it would take years for her to fully process what her choices had cost everyone involved. Looking back on that day, I realized that Jessica's announcement at my wedding reception had actually been a gift, though not the kind she'd intended. It had forced me to confront her betrayal immediately, preventing months or years of continued deception. It had shown me who my real friends were and strengthened my marriage by giving David and me our first real test as partners. Most importantly, it had taught me that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people experience the natural consequences of their own choices while you move forward with your life intact. Today, 2 years later, David and I are planning our second anniversary celebration. We're thinking of renewing our vows in a small ceremony with just family and close friends, people who showed up for us when it mattered and have earned their place in our lives. There will be no surprises, no hidden agendas, and no one who views our happiness as a competition to be won. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, surrounded by people who genuinely love and support you, while those who betrayed you deal with the emptiness they created in their own lives.